Nora Kilbride had cleared 10,000 containers in her head and been thanked for none. She sat the front desk at Harborline Freight for $11 an hour. The operations floor walked past her every morning like she was part of the furniture. They set their coffee cups on the edge of her desk, used it like a shelf. And when a manager misfiled an entry, wrong port, wrong line, she rerouted it before it could bounce, quietly without being asked. Nobody looked up. Nobody ever looked up. Then the COO came through. Preston Vaughn, on his way to a glass room with 22 people waiting inside it. He didn't slow down. "Sweetheart, just hold my calls," he said. "Leave the freight to people who went to school for it." Her father went to school on that dock. 30 years. That afternoon, $4.2 million froze at the port of Los Angeles, and the only person in the building who wasn't panicking was the woman they'd told to hold the calls. She'd already circled the reason on a yellow sticky note. If you've ever been judged by your title instead of your mind, this story is for you. Before we go further, do me one small thing. Subscribe so this story finds the next person who needs it. And comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Tell me where you are. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The service entrance at Harborline Freight and Logistics faced the water. That was the first thing Nora had learned about the place. The front doors, the tall glass ones with the etched company name and the brass handles worn bright, those belonged to the Hales, and the men in suits, and the clients who came in smelling of aftershave and money. Everyone else came in through the side, past the dumpsters, past the loading bay where the forklifts beeped in the dark before the sun was fully up. She came in that way every morning at 6:40. San Pedro was still gray then, still half asleep. The gulls arguing over something on the pier, and the big cranes standing against the sky, like the skeletons of animals too large to imagine. She liked that hour. The building was hers before it was theirs. She could set her bag down, start the coffee that nobody thanked her for, and stand at the window for 1 minute. Just one. And watch the ships. Her father had taught her to read the water. That was how he'd said it. Not the ships. The water. The way it moved around a hull told you how the vessel was loaded, whether she sat heavy or light, whether the men below had done their job right. Thomas Kilbride had spent 30 years on that dock, and by the end he could stand at the rail with a cup of coffee and tell you what was in a container by the way the ship rode. They'd let him go anyway. But that was later. That was a door Nora kept shut. She was 29 years old, and she answered the phone for a living. That was the official version. Front desk temp. $11 an hour, no benefits, no name on the directory, just reception, like she was a room and not a person. She wore the same 2 blazers on rotation, and she smiled at men who couldn't remember her face from 1 week to the next. But at night, the version of her that mattered came out. After 5, when the floor emptied and the suits took the elevator down and drove off toward the hills where the lights were, Nora stayed. She told herself it was to finish filing. Sometimes it was, but mostly she stayed for the manifests. The manifests were nobody's business but the brokers and the managers. Long documents, dense as scripture, bills of lading, packing lists, commercial invoices, the tariff headings that told the government what a thing was and how much it owed to enter the country. Most people at Harborline found them boring. Numbers and codes, 10-digit strings that meant nothing to the eye. They meant everything to Nora. She'd pull a folder she had no reason to open, and she'd read it the way other people read a novel. Here was a shipment of ceramic tile from Spain. Here was a container of auto parts from Mexico, moving under a trade agreement that shaved the duty to nothing if the paperwork was clean. Here was an entry somebody had botched. The wrong heading, a decimal in the wrong place, and she'd feel the small electric pleasure of catching it, of knowing, of being right in a language nobody had asked her to speak. It was the one place she still felt like her father's daughter. She'd sit at the empty front desk with a folder open under the one lamp she left on, and she'd hear his voice. "Read it twice, Nora. The government doesn't care what you meant. It cares what you wrote. He drilled her on it at the kitchen table when she was 17, back when the plan was for her to be somebody. Back when there'd been a plan at all. There was a card in her bag she never took out where anyone could see it. A tariff card, a little laminated thing, the harmonized codes printed small, the margins worn soft and gray from her father's thumb. He'd carried it for years. When they walked him out, he'd pressed it into her hand in the parking lot and said, "Keep it. You'll use it before I will." She'd cried in the car. Then she'd wiped her face and driven home, and she hadn't cried about it since. Now it lived in the inner pocket of her bag, and some nights she'd take it out just to hold it. The plastic had gone cloudy at the corners. His handwriting crawled up the side of it in blue pen. A note to himself. A rule. A reminder. She knew the codes by heart. She didn't need the card to read a manifest. She kept it because it was him. The morning it started was a Tuesday. She knew because Tuesdays were when Marcus Ruiz brought her the good coffee. Marcus supervised the dock, a solid, easy man of 34, with forearms like mooring lines and a way of leaning on her desk that took up half of it. He'd known her father. That was most of why he liked her, and she knew it, and she didn't mind. He brought her a real coffee from the place 2 blocks up, not the tar from the break room, and he'd stay too long, and she'd let him, because he was kind and the mornings were long. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said, setting the cup down. "I slept fine. You were here till 9. Ramon locked up. He said your car was still in the lot." Nora took the coffee. "I was reading." "Reading what? You don't get paid to read." "That's exactly why I do it." She smiled, took the lid off, breathed the steam. "You remember the Delgado line? The reefer container that got flagged last spring?" Marcus made a face. "I remember it sat on the dock for a week, and everybody yelled. It sat because somebody entered it under the wrong subheading. Frozen shrimp under a heading for prepared seafood. Different duty, different rules. If they'd caught it day 1, it clears day 1. She shrugged. "Nobody caught it. You caught it. I wasn't allowed to say anything." She sipped. "I'm the phone." Marcus looked at her for a second, longer than he needed to. He had that look sometimes, the one that said he saw her clearly and wished she'd let him do something about it. He never pushed. That was the thing about Marcus. He was the man who'd never quite ask, and she was the woman who'd never quite let him, and they both knew the shape of it and left it alone. "You know," he said, "you used to talk about the exam." "Back when?" Something crossed her face and settled. "I used to sit the broker exam back when Dad still worked here," she said. Light, offhand, like it was nothing. Long time ago. And that was all she said. She didn't finish it. She picked up the ringing phone instead. "Harborline Freight, how may I direct your call?" And Marcus watched her a moment more, and then went back down to the dock, and the sentence hung there in the air behind her, and then it was gone. She never explained it. He never asked. The trouble arrived at 10:15, and it arrived as a phone call, the way trouble usually did. She heard it before she understood it, the ops floor going loud all at once, chairs pushed back, a voice saying, "No, that's not, wait, read it again." She stood at her desk and looked over the low partition and watched a dozen grown men discover they had a problem. The problem had a number. Container Helbu 4471902. 40 feet of industrial textile machinery, looms and carting equipment, the kind of heavy iron a mill runs on, inbound from overseas, consigned to Harborline's biggest account, $4.2 million of freight. And it had just gone on a customs hold. Nora knew what a hold meant before any of them said it out loud. A hold meant the container did not move. Not off the terminal, not onto a truck, not anywhere. It sat. And a container that sat racked up demurrage, the port's charge for taking up space, and demurrage on a box like that ran $18,000 a day. $18,000 a day. More than she made in a year. Every 24 hours the box didn't move. But that wasn't even the part that had the floor sweating. She learned the rest in pieces. The way she learned everything. By listening. By not being seen. By being the phone. The machinery was the front end of the anchor contract. Redfern Retail. $30 million a year, the account that kept the lights on. The name Gerald Hale put in the first paragraph of every pitch. And Redfern's contract had a clause with teeth. The first big shipment had to clear and deliver by the quarterly close, or the whole thing was void. A test of Harborline's competence, written into the ink. The quarter closed in 9 days. 9 days. 18,000 a day. A box that wouldn't move. And a $30 million account watching to see if Harborline could tie its own shoes. By noon they had a war room going in the glass conference room. She could see them through the wall. Vaughn at the head of the table in his good suit, jabbing a finger at a screen. Men on phones. A woman from legal with a stack of paper. They pulled up the customs notice. They read it 4 different ways. They called the broker of record, and the broker of record said the entry was filed correctly, and it was the government's problem now. And Vaughn threw a pen. Nora watched all of it from her desk, 40 feet away, holding calls. She'd already read the notice. She wasn't supposed to have. But the entry summary had come through the shared drive that morning. Everything did. That was how a small shop ran. And she'd opened it out of the same habit that made her open everything, and she'd seen the problem in about 90 seconds. It wasn't a document problem. It was a classification problem. Somebody had entered the machinery under a heading that pulled it into an anti-dumping case. Anti-dumping, the duties the government slaps on certain foreign goods sold too cheap to protect American makers. There were active cases on some kinds of imported machine parts. Whoever prepared this entry had chosen a subheading that fell inside one of those cases, and the moment it hit the system did exactly what it was built to do. It froze the box and demanded a cash deposit and a mountain of proof, because the code said this shipment might be dumped goods. Except it wasn't. The looms weren't covered merchandise. Nora would have bet her father's card on it. The equipment fell under a different heading entirely, a clean one. General duty. Nothing to do with the anti-dumping order. Somebody had reached for the wrong 10 digits, and those 10 digits were now costing $18,000 a day. She wrote it on a yellow sticky note. Small handwriting. The correct heading, and beside it, in 3 words, the reason the hold was wrong. She peeled it and pressed it to the corner of her monitor, and she looked at it, and she thought, I am the phone. Nobody in that room is going to ask the phone. She was right about that for exactly 4 hours. At 4 in the afternoon, a man stopped at her desk, who did not usually stop at her desk. Adrian Hale was the owner's son. Everybody knew him, and nobody knew him. He'd been made operations VP 3 months ago, a title that had appeared on the directory over a weekend. No explanation. The way things happened when your last name was on the building. He was 34, and he wore his father's kind of suit without his father's kind of ease, and the floor had spent 3 months deciding he was decoration. He didn't look like decoration right now. He looked like a man who'd been in a glass room since noon watching money burn, and who had walked out of it not because he had somewhere to be, but because he couldn't stand to be in there another minute pretending he understood. He stopped at the front desk because it was the one place on the floor that was quiet. Nora looked up. Can I get you something, Mr. Hale? No. He said it too fast, then seemed to hear himself. No, thank you. He looked back toward the glass room, then at her, then, and this was the thing, this was the small strange thing, he looked at her like a person instead of a fixture. You've been out here all day. You hear everything, don't you? I answer the phone. That's not what I asked. She held his eyes for a second. There was something in his face that wasn't his father and wasn't Vaughn. Something younger and more honest and more scared. A man out of his depth who knew he was out of his depth, which was rarer than it should have been. His gaze dropped, not to her, to the corner of her monitor, to the sticky note. She saw him read it. She saw him not understand it, and then start to. His lips moved a little over the code. He leaned over her desk, one hand flat on the surface, close enough that she could smell the coffee gone cold on him and see the tired lines around his eyes. And he read it again. "What is this?" he said quietly. "It's the heading the machinery should have been entered under." Should have been. He didn't straighten up. He stayed leaned over her desk, and it went on a beat too long, and neither of them moved to fix it. The entry was filed right. The broker said, "The broker filed it consistently." That's not the same as filing it right. She kept her voice low, level, the way her father had taught her to talk when she was sure and outnumbered. "You're on a hold because the classification put your looms inside an anti-dumping order. They don't belong there. Wrong heading. Change the heading, the basis for the hold goes away." He was very still. "You've had this? Since when?" She didn't answer that. "The truth, since 10:15 this morning, since before your war room started, was not a thing you said out loud to the owner's son on your second week of being tolerated." He straightened up finally. He picked the sticky note off her monitor, peeled it clean, and held it in his fingers like it might be worth something or might be worth nothing, and he genuinely could not tell which. "What's your name?" he said. And she almost told him. She felt the whole of it rise up in her throat. The name, the license, the 30 years, her father in the parking lot with the card. But the glass door of the conference room opened behind him, and the noise of the war room spilled out, and the moment closed like a fist, and she said, "Reception." He looked at her strangely. Then Vaughn's voice cut across the floor. "Adrian, we need you. Legal's on with the port." And Adrian Hale turned and walked back into the glass room with a yellow sticky note in his hand. And Nora sat back down and answered a ringing phone and said, "Harborline Freight. How may I direct your call?" and did not let her voice shake. The next morning, they brought her into the glass room. It was Adrian who did it. She found that out later. Adrian standing up in front of Vaughn and Legal and the whole assembled floor and saying he wanted to hear from the person who'd flagged the classification. Vaughn had asked which consultant. Adrian had said the receptionist. And the room had done a thing rooms do when the ground shifts under them, and somebody had come to get her. She walked in wearing her better blazer. 22 people. She counted them without meaning to. It was a habit, counting, her mind reaching for numbers when the rest of her was afraid. 22 people around and behind a long table, and a screen on the wall with the customs notice blown up large, and every face turning to look at the woman who held the calls. Vaughn did not stand. He leaned back in the chair at the head of the table with his arms crossed and watched her come in like she was a delivery he hadn't ordered. Adrian was standing. "Everyone," he said, "this is..." And he stopped because he didn't know her name, because she'd given him reception, and the pause hung there and told the whole room exactly what she was. "Go ahead," Vaughn said. He said it the way you'd hand a child the wheel of a car. "Tell us how to run our clearance." Nora set her hands flat on the back of an empty chair. She didn't sit. Sitting felt like it needed permission, and she wasn't going to ask for it. "The container's on hold because of how it was classified," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "The entry put the machinery under a subheading that falls inside an active anti-dumping order. That's what triggered the hold and the deposit demand. The equipment on that manifest, the looms, the carding frames, those aren't covered merchandise under that order. They classify under a different heading. General duty. Nothing to do with dumping. If you correct the classification, the legal basis for the hold..." "Stop." Vaughn held up a hand, and he smiled while he did it, which was worse. "Sweetheart, I've got a licensed broker of record who filed this entry. I've got legal counsel on the phone. I've got 20 years in this business." He looked around the table, gathering the room to him. "And I'm supposed to change a $4 million customs filing because the girl who answers the phone read a code on the internet?" A few of them laughed. Not cruelly, just the reflexive laugh of people relieved it isn't them being laughed at. Leave the freight, Vaughn said to people who went to school for it. The room went quiet in the way that means a thing has been decided. Nora looked at him. She looked at Adrian, who had gone very still by the window and was not laughing, whose jaw had tightened, who looked for a second like he might say something, and didn't. And she understood, standing there with her hands on the back of a chair that wasn't hers, that there was nothing she could say in this room that would be heard as anything but a receptionist's opinion. The heading was right. She knew it the way she knew her own name, and it did not matter, because of where she was standing and what they thought she was. So she took her hands off the chair. The heading you filed under, she said, and she said the full 10 digits, slow, each one landing in the silence like a coin on a counter, carries the anti-dumping exposure. The heading it should be under, and she said those 10 digits too, cleaner, faster, from memory, without looking at a single piece of paper, does not. That's the difference between a box that sits and a box that moves. You can look it up. It won't change while you do. Then she walked out. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She walked past the 22 faces and out the glass door and back to the front desk. And she sat down, and she picked up a phone that wasn't even ringing just to have something in her hands. And behind her, through the wall, she watched a room full of people slowly turn to look at the screen where the numbers were and check them and go quiet in a different way than before. She'd named it. She'd said the exact heading, out loud, in front of all of them. And she knew the way you know weather, that they were checking it right now and finding out she was right. And that being right in that room, dressed like that, paid like that, was going to cost her more than being wrong ever could. She found out how much at the end of the day, when Adrian Hale came to find her. He didn't come to the desk. She was in the file room, the old one, the physical archive nobody used anymore, where the paper entries went to be forgotten. She'd gone in to reshelve a folder, and mostly to be alone, to stand between the tall metal rows where nobody set coffee cups on her, and nobody called her sweetheart. The light in there was bad. One buzzing tube overhead, half the fixtures dead. It smelled like old paper and dust and the sea, faintly, the way everything in San Pedro smelled like the sea if you stood still long enough. He came in, and the door sighed shut behind him, and for a second he just stood there at the end of the row, and she braced for it, for the letting go. Temps got let go for a lot less than embarrassing the COO. Instead, he said, "You were right." She didn't turn around. She kept her hand on the folder she was sliding into place. "I know. We pulled the ruling. The looms aren't covered." Vaughn had legal check it 3 times because he didn't want it to be true, and it's true. A pause, the heading you gave. Both of them. Off the top of your head. You didn't even look. I didn't need to look. Nobody in that room could have done that. He came a few steps down the row. She could hear his shoes on the concrete. Nobody in that room did do that. 22 people, and the person who solved it was standing at the door, because we didn't give her a chair. Now she turned. He was closer than she'd thought. The row was narrow. The shelves crowded them, and there was maybe 4 feet between them and nowhere for either of them to go. His tie was loosened. He looked worse than he had yesterday, older, like the day had cost him something too. "Why are you in here?" she said. "You could have had someone tell me I was right." "Because I wanted to say it myself." He looked at her, and there it was again. The honest thing. The out-of-his-depth thing. But underneath it now, something steadier that hadn't been there before. And because I need help. And you're the only person in this building who has any. You have brokers. I have a broker who filed us into a hold and won't admit it. I have a COO who'd rather lose the account than take advice from you. He said it flatly, no apology dressed up in it. Just the truth laid on the table. I have 9 days. 8 now. And I have you. The tube light buzzed. Somewhere out on the water a ship's horn sounded, low and long, and rolled through the building the way it always did. the way it had every day of her childhood. "You don't even know my name," she said. He was quiet. "Then tell me." And she almost did. Again, the file room was doing something to her. The dark and the paper, and the fact that he'd come in here, into the forgotten room, to say she was right when he could have sent a memo. She felt the name come up in her again, and she felt, under it, the whole weight of the thing it would open. The license. The 30 years. Her father's name, which was her name, which was a name that meant something very specific inside these walls that Adrian Hale did not yet know. "It's Nora," she said. Just that. Just the first name, offered like a single card face up on the table, with the rest of the hand still hidden. "Nora," he said it carefully, like it was a thing he might break. "Will you help me clear it, Nora?" Out on the water the horn sounded again. She looked at him for a long moment. 8 days. 18,000 a day. A container that carried the quarter, and the account, and, though he didn't know it, and couldn't know it, a door she'd kept shut for years standing right behind her father's name. "I need everything on that entry," she heard herself say. The commercial invoice, the packing list, the mill certificates, every piece of paper that came with those looms. "And I need it tonight, not tomorrow, because tomorrow's another $18,000. Something in his shoulders let go. "You'll do it. I'll look." She turned back to the shelf, because if she kept looking at him, she was going to say more than Nora. And it wasn't time. "Not yet. I'm not promising you a clear. I'm promising you the truth about what's wrong. That's all I've got. That's all anybody honest can give you. That's more than I've had all week." He left her the folders that night, a whole banker's box of them, set on the table in the file room without a word to anyone, because they both understood that whatever this was, it happened after 5. In the room with the bad light, where no one from the glass floor would think to look. She stayed until 11. She spread the paper out under the buzzing tube, and she took the laminated card out of her bag and set it beside her. Her father's thumb-worn card, the codes he'd carried, and she read every page the way he'd taught her. Twice, "The government doesn't care what you meant," and somewhere in the second hour, deep in the mill's own documents, in the fine print of where the machinery had been made and how, she found the first loose thread of the thing that would either save Harborline or bury it, and she pulled it, gently, and felt it give. She didn't know yet that pulling it would drag her father's name out of the dark along with the freight, but she was about to find out, and so were they. The thread she pulled had a date on it. That was the thing. Not a name, not a number, not some buried clause. A date. Stamped in the corner of the mill's own certificate of origin, in the little box where the machinery was supposed to have been finished and boxed and readied for the sea, and the date was wrong. Not wrong the way a tired clerk gets a Tuesday mixed up with a Wednesday. Wrong the way a whole story is wrong when somebody builds it backward from the ending they need. Nora sat very still under the buzzing tube. She'd seen this before. Once, a long time ago, at her father's kitchen table, with a plate of cold eggs going hard beside a stack of paper, just like this one. He'd shown her the same kind of gap, the date that didn't line up with the shipping, the certificate that claimed a country the freight had never touched. She was 17 then. She hadn't understood why his hands were shaking. She understood now. Because if the mill certificate was wrong about where these looms were made, then the whole anti-dumping question changed. It wasn't a matter of the code Vaughn's people had fat-fingered. It was a matter of origin. And origin was the one thing this company had never learned to read correctly. Not in 30 years, not since the day they'd hung the whole failure on a foreman named Kilbride and sent him home. She put the card back in her bag. She did not cry. She'd done that already, years ago, and it hadn't cleared a single container. The next morning she came in through the service entrance the way she always did, past the loading bays, past Ramon rattling the roll-up gates, past the smell of diesel and salt and wet cardboard that had raised her more surely than any house. She sat down at the front desk at 6:40. She held the calls. She rerouted a misfiled entry from a manager on the third floor who would never know she'd caught it. And she waited for Adrian Hale to come down. He came down at 10:15. He didn't lean on the desk this time. He'd learned that much. He stood a proper foot back, a paper cup of the machine coffee in each hand, and he set one at the edge of her desk the way you'd set down an offering. Cheap cocoa, no sugar. He'd asked Marcus how she took it. Marcus had told him. That was its own small story. "You found something," Adrian said. "I found a hole." She wrapped her hands around the cup. The code was never the real problem. The code was the symptom. The real problem is the certificate of origin. The mill says these looms were finished in a country that isn't inside the anti-dumping order. If that's true, we clear tomorrow. Clean, so it's good news. It's a landmine. She looked up at him. Because the date on the certificate doesn't match the bill of lading. Somebody backfilled it. And if I file it as it stands, and customs pulls the thread I just pulled, they don't just hold the container. They open the company. 8 days of demurrage becomes a fraud inquiry. You understand? The paper that's supposed to save you is the paper that can bury you. He set his own cup down. His hand wasn't quite steady. "Then what do we do?" he said. Not a challenge. A question from a man who had run out of people to ask. "We find the real one," she said. "There's a binding ruling out there, a precedent, some other importer, some other year. Brought this exact class of machinery under this exact scenario and asked customs to rule on it, and customs ruled. If I can find that ruling, I can reclassify the whole entry on solid ground. Ground nobody can knock out from under us. But I need the mill's true origin records, not the ones somebody dressed up, the real ones. And if they don't exist, they exist." She almost smiled. "The government keeps everything. That's the one mercy in this whole trade. Somewhere in this building, or in an archive we pay to hold, there is a true set of papers for these looms. Nobody throws away freight records, not even the people who want to." He was quiet a moment. "Nora," he said, "whoever you are, I don't think I can pay you enough to do this." "You're not paying me at all," she said. $11 an hour is for holding calls. This one's on me. That was the 50. That was the point where the road only ran one way. She could have handed him the box back and gone home and let the quarter fall on the heads of the men who'd earned it falling. Instead, she'd made it hers. She'd signed on. Not on paper. That would come, but in the only place that counted, which was the place inside where a person decides what they're going to carry. She found the binding ruling 2 nights later. It took her into the second hour again, deep in a database her father had taught her to navigate before she was old enough to drive, and when she found it, she actually laughed out loud in the empty file room. One sharp bark of sound under the dead tube. A ruling from 11 years back. Same class of industrial textile machinery. Same question of origin. Same order. Customs had ruled the goods outside the scope. She had her ground. She pulled her father's laminated card out of her bag and pressed it flat on the table next to the printout. And she felt him there the way you feel someone standing just behind you. And she said, quietly, to no one, "Found it, Dad." But the ruling was only half. The ruling told her what to file. It didn't give her the certificate to file it with. She still needed the true country of origin paper. And the true paper was nowhere in the box. So she was still short when the dinner came. They needed her there, and they resented needing her, and both of those things were true at the same time. Which is how it usually goes with people who've decided your worth in advance. Redfern's buyers were in town. The anchor client. $30 million a year riding on whether Harborline could still be trusted to move freight without dropping it in the sea. Gerald Hale wanted a show of confidence, a room full of the right faces. And somebody, at the last hour, realized they might need someone in that room who actually understood the hold, in case a buyer asked a hard question. So they brought Nora as support staff. To stand along the wall. She wore the one good dress she owned. Nobody noticed. Camille Ashford noticed the room, though. Camille was the kind of woman rooms were built for. Bored family, easy laugh, a hand that found Adrian's forearm at exactly the right beats. The approved match. Everyone at the table understood the arrangement without a word of it being spoken, the way you understand the weather. Adrian sat beside her and answered when spoken to, and looked, to Nora, like a man wearing a suit 2 sizes too tidy for the body inside it. The buyer asked the hard question over the second course. "So this container," the man said, dabbing his mouth. "The one at the port. We keep hearing it's cleared. Then we hear it's held. Which is it, before we sign for another year of this?" The table went a particular kind of still. Vaughn started to answer. He got as far as "Our team is confident that the classification issue." Before the buyer waved it off, bored, and that was the gap. The small silence. And Nora stepped into it from the wall, because nobody else in the room could. "It's held," she said. "As of tonight. Day 8 of 9. Vaughn's head turned like a gun. "But it clears," she went on, evenly to the buyer, "because the hold was never valid. The machinery was filed under a tariff heading that pulled it into an anti-dumping order it was never subject to. There's a binding ruling from Customs, 11 years old, that puts this exact class of goods outside that order. We file to the ruling. The hold releases. Your looms make the quarter with a day to spare." She paused. "Providing the origin documents hold up, which is the part your people should be losing sleep over, not the code." The buyer looked at her for the first time. Really looked. "And who are you?" he said. Not unkind. Just, who is this, at the wall, who just answered the thing 3 vice presidents couldn't? "Support staff," Vaughn said, too fast. Nora let it sit. Then she smiled at the buyer. And she picked up the water pitcher from the service table beside her, because that, after all, was what support staff were for, and she filled his glass. And as she set the pitcher down, she said, quietly, so quietly, only the near end of the table caught it, aimed at Vaughn and no one else, "You held $4 million hostage over a code that didn't match. And you paid the one person in this company who could read it $11 an hour to bring you coffee." Vaughn's face did something complicated. The buyer laughed. He thought it was a joke. He thought it was charming. He signed nothing that night, but he didn't walk either. And when he left, he shook Nora's hand and not Vaughn's. And everyone at the table saw it. And Camille Ashford saw it most of all, because Camille had spent her whole life reading rooms, and she had just watched the temperature of one shift toward the woman on the wall. Adrian didn't say a word to Nora at the dinner. He couldn't. But when it broke up, he found her by the coat check, and he said, "Lo, that was," and stopped, because there wasn't a word for it that fit in the hallway. And she said, "Go home, Mr. Hale." And he said, "Adrian." And she said, "I know your name." And that was the crossing, the first name thing, said backward and sideways and true. 2 days later, Vaughn came for her. He'd been digging. Of course he had. A man like Preston Vaughn doesn't lose a room and let it lie. He'd made calls. He'd pulled the temp agency file. He'd found what he needed, and he chose his moment, which was the worst possible one, which was on purpose. The morning of day 2 remaining, with Redfern's cancellation letter already in draft, with Gerald Hale himself down on the operations floor for once, standing among the desks he owned and never visited. Vaughn walked up to the front desk with a folder, and he set it down on top of Nora's keyboard, and he said it loud enough for the glass floor to hear. "Nora Kilbride," he said. "That's the name, isn't it? Kilbride." The floor slowed. People do, when a name is said like a verdict. "You're a licensed customs broker," Vaughn said. "Licensed, sitting at a front desk pretending to answer phones. You never disclosed it. Not on your application, not to the agency, not to anyone." He turned to Gerald, playing to the owner now. "She's been inside our entries for 2 weeks. Undisclosed. And here's the part you'll want to hear, Gerald. Her father is Tomas Kilbride." Something moved across Gerald Hale's face and was gone. "The foreman," Vaughn said. "The one we let go. 30 years ago she watched us end her father's career, and now she's crawled in through the temp agency and gotten her hands on the biggest entry we've filed all year. You want to call that a coincidence?" He looked around at the gathered faces, warming to it, sure of it. "She engineered this. The hold, the confusion, all of it. She's not saving the quarter. She's here to embarrass us. It's sabotage wearing a name tag." It was a good lie. That was the terrible thing about it. It had the shape of truth. It had a father, and a grievance, and a hidden license, and a woman where a woman shouldn't be. And if you didn't know her, if you'd never watched her fix a stranger's mistake and take no credit for it, you could believe every word. Nora stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She never had. That wasn't the weapon her father gave her. "I'm a licensed broker," she said. "That part's true. I sat the exam 8 years ago, back when my father still worked this dock. I passed it first try. I never used it, because the week my license came in the mail was the week you people put my father's things in a box and walked him out that service door for a failure that wasn't his." She looked at Gerald Hale when she said it. Only at him. "You want to know why a clerk knows what your managers don't? That's why. I learned this trade at a kitchen table from a man who gave you 30 years and got a cardboard box for it." "So you admit it," Vaughn said. "You came here with a grudge." "I came here because it was the only job the agency had," she said. "I didn't ask for that container. Your people misfiled it. I fixed it because I can't watch a mistake sit there any more than my father could." "That's not sabotage, Mr. Vaughn. That's the opposite. That's the thing you've never once in your life understood." She turned to Gerald. "But since we're saying names out loud on the floor for everyone, let's say the rest of it. The container that ended my father. 30 years ago. It failed because somebody upstairs cut the inspection budget to make a quarter. Sound familiar? He knew whose call it was. He never said. He took the box and kept his mouth shut so the company he loved wouldn't take the hit. And you," her voice didn't rise, but it went somewhere colder, cleaner. "You let a man carry your mistake for 30 years, and you never once corrected the record." The floor was silent. Gerald Hale said nothing. And his silence said everything. 22 people, more, watched the owner of Harborline Freight open his mouth to deny it and find that he couldn't. Because the woman at the front desk was right, and he knew she was right, and everyone standing there watched him know it. Nora picked up her bag. She took her father's card off the desk edge where she'd been keeping it, and she slid it into the inner pocket. And she pushed in her chair the way you do when you're not coming back to it. "You'll clear the container," she said to the room. "To all of them. The ruling's in the box. Adrian has it. File to the 11-year precedent, find the true certificate of origin, and you'll make your quarter. You don't need me for the paperwork. You never needed me. You just needed to not walk past me for 2 weeks." She settled the strap on her shoulder. "I'll leave the freight to people who went to school for it." And she walked out the way she'd come in. Through the service door, head up, no scene. The door swung shut behind her with the soft pneumatic sigh it always made, and on the other side of it the diesel and the salt were exactly where she'd left them, indifferent, and she stood in the loading bay for one long breath, and then she went home. Behind her the clock kept running. Day 2. Then Day 1. Vaughn's team could not find the certificate. They filed to the ruling, and the ruling held. She'd been right about that. Right about all of it. But the reclassification needed a valid country of origin document to stand on. And the one in the mill's box was the doctored one. The one with the date that didn't match. And no honest broker would put his signature under it, and no dishonest one could make it survive an audit. The clean paper wasn't in the building. Redfern's people set a deadline of 4 in the afternoon on the final day. The cancellation letter moved from draft to signed but unsent, which is the last stop before the cliff. And Adrian Hale sat in his father's office, and made a choice. "You buried a man," he said to Gerald. "You buried a good man to save a bad quarter, and you let me grow up thinking that was just how the company worked. I'm not doing it again. Not with her, not with the freight, not with any of it." "She humiliated us on the floor," Gerald said. "No," Adrian said. "You did that 30 years ago. She just read it back to you." He stood. "I'm bringing her back, publicly, where you shoved her out. And you're going to stand there and watch her save the thing your people couldn't, and then you're going to fix what you broke. Or I walk too, Dad, and you can explain to Redfern why both the people who understood the freight left in the same week." He found her at her father's kitchen table. Of course he did. Where else? Nora Kilbride sat across from her, 63 and gray, and still built like a man who'd spent his life moving 40-foot boxes. And there was paper between them, and cold coffee, and when Adrian knocked Tomas, looked at him the way a man looks at the name that ended him. "Mr. Kilbride," Adrian said, "I'm not here for me. I'm here because your daughter's the only person alive who can clear that container honestly, and the only records that can do it are the ones you kept." Tomas didn't move. "I keep everything," he said finally. 30 years on that dock. I never threw away a paper in my life. It's the one mercy in the trade." He looked at Nora. Something passed between them that had 30 years in it. The true origin certs for that mill's machinery. The real ones. "I filed them myself. The first time Harborline ever imported from them. Before your father cut the budget. Before any of it." He stood, slow, and went to a closet in the hall, and came back with a banker's box of his own, soft-cornered with age, and set it on the table, with both hands the way you set down something that cost you your career. "Everything you need is in here. It always was. Nobody ever asked." The container cleared on the terminal floor. That was Adrian's doing. That had happened there. In the open, on the pier, in front of the same office crowd that had watched Vaughn try to bury her. He brought them all down to the terminal on the final morning. The glass floor managers in their good shoes on the oily concrete, blinking in the salt light, not sure why they were there. Gerald in a topcoat that was wrong for the dock. Camille, because she'd asked to come, which said something about Camille. And Nora, at a folding table borrowed from the brake trailer, with her father's box open beside her, and her father's laminated card taped to the edge of the laptop where she could see it. She worked for 4 hours. She reconstructed the country of origin certificate under the trade agreement from her father's archived paper, crosswalked to the 11-year ruling, married to the corrected tariff heading, the whole clean chain of it, every date matching every date. The true story of where the looms were made, and how, told in the only language the government listens to. She built it plank by plank while the tide came up the pilings, and the gulls worked the water, and the men who'd walked past her for 2 weeks stood in a loose half-circle and watched a temp clerk do the thing their whole department couldn't. At 2 in the afternoon she hit send. At 3:40 the hold released. You could see it happen. That was the thing nobody expected. That it would be visible, physical, real. A yard hostler fired up and hooked the chassis, and the reefer stack lights changed. And 40 feet of steel that had sat frozen for 9 days, $4.2 million of it, Elbu 4471902, began to move. It rolled off the stack and down the road toward the gate and the Redfern trucks. 1 hour ahead of the 4 o'clock deadline, and the whole crowd on the pier watched it go, and nobody clapped. Because it wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of quiet that comes when a room full of people realize at the same second that they were wrong about someone. Vaughn stood at the edge of it. Gerald Hale walked over to him. Everyone saw it. The owner and the COO, on the pier, in the wind. "The Redfern account's cleared," Gerald said. "The quarter's made." "And you're done here, Preston," Vaughn started to speak. "You spent 2 weeks calling her a saboteur," Gerald said. to cover the fact that your department filed a $4 million entry under the wrong heading and couldn't fix it. The board will hear all of it. The hold strategy. The name tag speech. Everything. He didn't raise his voice either. He'd learned that at least in the last 2 days. Clean out your office. Use the front. You've earned the walk. That was the whole of it. One dry beat. A man who'd built a career on the contempt of a title, undone by the one person he'd been most sure didn't have one. He didn't rage. Men like that never do. At the end, he just got smaller, there on the pier, and then he turned and went, and the water took the sound of it. Then Gerald Hale walked to the folding table. Nora Kilbride had come. He'd stood at the back the whole time, near the gate, in a windbreaker, watching his daughter read the water the way he'd taught her. Gerald crossed the whole length of that pier to reach him, past every manager. And he stopped in front of a man he'd wronged 30 years ago, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Tom," Gerald said. "Gerald, your record's clean as of this morning," Gerald said. "I called it in myself. The failure's off your file. It's back where it belonged the whole time, on the budget line I signed." His voice caught, and he let it. "It should have been 30 years ago. I know that. I knew it then." Tomas looked at him a long moment. 30 years is 30 years, he said. "You can't buy those back." Then he looked past Gerald, to the table, to Nora, who'd stood up. But she got it done clean. "My paper, her hands. That's not nothing." He almost smiled. "That's everything, actually." Camille Ashford found her coat. She'd watched the whole thing from the side. And Camille was nobody's fool. She'd read the room on the pier the way she read every room. And she saw where the current ran now, and she saw it ran away from her, and she had the grace not to fight the sea. She caught Adrian's eye once. She gave him a small nod, the kind that closes an arrangement without a word. And she stepped back into the crowd and let the space open where she'd been standing, which left the space beside Nora empty. Adrian crossed it in front of all of them. That was the line. Everyone understood it was the line. The owner's son, walking across an open pier past the whole board, past his father, to stand beside a front desk temp in her one good dress with oil on the hem now from the terminal floor. He didn't take her hand. It wasn't that kind of moment either, not yet. He just stood beside her, on her side of the line, where everyone could see which side he'd chosen. "You cleared it," he said. "My father cleared it," she said, 30 years ago. "I just filed the paper." Marcus Ruiz was there too at the edge, and he saw it the way you see weather coming that you can't stop, and he was decent about it, which is the hardest kind of decent there is. He gave Nora a small salute, 2 fingers off the brim of his hard hat, the way the dockmen do, and he went back to his gang, and that was Marcus, who never won and never made her feel the cost of it. A good man on a dock full of them. Adrian didn't say "I love you." He said the other thing. The truer thing, for a story that was never really about a dinner or a dress, but about a door, about which door a person is allowed to walk through, and who decides it. "Come upstairs," he said, "through the front." Nora Kilbride had used the service entrance for 2 years, past the loading bays, past the diesel, through the door that side. She had used it the day they hired her, and she'd used it the day Vaughn tried to bury her, and she'd never once, not one time, walked in through the front of the building she'd saved. She walked through it that afternoon. Main doors. Glass and steel, the Harborline name etched across it. The lobby with the good light that the top floor got, and the loading bay never did. She walked in through the front, with her father's box under her arm, and her father's card in her bag. And the light fell on her the way it fell on the people who'd always been allowed inside. And it turned out, the light didn't care where you'd come from. It never had. Only the people did. 6 months later, there was a door on the 3rd floor, with her name on it. Nora Kilbride, it said, and under it, Customs Broker. And the letters were gold, and they caught the morning when the sun came up over San Pedro and found the water. Inside, the office was small and lit, and hers. Her father's laminated tariff card was taped to the corner of her monitor. Margin worn. Thumb softened. The codes he'd carried for 30 years watching over the codes she carried now. On the wall, framed, was the true certificate of origin. The one that cleared the container. The one her father had kept when no one asked, matted behind glass like the thing it was, which was proof. Proof that competence keeps everything, and throws away nothing, and waits. The coffee was already on her desk when she got in. Cheap cocoa, no sugar. Adrian had learned to make it the way she took it, which is a smaller thing than a declaration and a larger thing than a ring, and he brought it up every morning through the front and set it at the edge of her desk the way you set down an offering, and never once set it there like a shelf. Down on the dock, Nora Kilbride was back. Not on the payroll he'd been walked out of, but a better one. A paid consultant now, gray and unhurried, standing among the new hires in the salt light. A clipboard in one hand and 30 years in the other. Nora could see him from her window if she stood at the right angle. She stood there most mornings. She watched him gather the young ones around a 40-foot box and point out to the water, and she couldn't hear him from up there, but she knew the words, because he'd said them to her at a kitchen table when she was small enough to believe they were magic. You don't read the paper, he was telling them. Anybody can read the paper. You learn to read the water. You learn to see what's really in the box before you ever open it. The government doesn't care what you meant. It only cares what's true. And the new hires listened, because he was the old man who knew, and none of them could tell, looking at him, that the company had once tried to end him, or that his daughter had once been a temp they walked past, or that the whole shining office above them had been saved by two people they'd have never thought to ask. That's the part worth sitting with, if you've come this far with me. The people who move the world are so often the ones we've decided not to see. The clerk at the desk. The old man on the dock. The one in the room without the right title. Holding the answer. Waiting to be asked. Competence has no dress code. It never did. It just needs one door held open, one time, by someone willing to cross a line to hold it. If you've ever been the one they walked past, comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels.